Listen, I tell you, if I had $1 for every time someone said that no one wants to work anymore, I would be fully retired, right? We think that this idea, this concept of no one wants to work looks like Gen Z logging off on time, or millennials asking the question about why before the how, or Gen X just keeping their head down and just quietly working while rolling their eyes. Now, listen, work ethic is not gone. It just doesn't look like suffering anymore, right? So, welcome to the Generational Edge with Kristina Green podcast. I am your generational translator, and I help to translate the friction in the workplace before it starts to escalate. I'm the referee for the generations and the workplace and in the wild. And I don't take sides, but I will absolutely call out the bias, the assumptions, and those back in my day energy that is absolutely keeping your team stuck. Today, we're unpacking one of the laziest takes on modern leadership and why it's actually wrecking your teams. So, we keep judging today's workforce using yesterday's playbook. It's time to evolve. It's time to step into 2026. All right. So, listen, let's get into it. No one wants to work anymore is actually rooted in frustration, right? It's a frustration with how things are changing, how they're evolving, and moving at a pace that perhaps maybe not everyone is welcoming to, right? It's this idea, it's grieving the loss of an era that has passed, that not only technologically but also to interpersonally things are changing. The dynamics have shifted in the workplace. And they're starting to feel what that looks like. And so there's a grieving of time that has passed, time that no longer exists. And this is an attempt to try to hold on to that, to speak to a time where they recall things being a little different. And honestly, in their thoughts, a little bit better. This is also too part of a refusal to reset expectations, right? To what that might look like in today's environment where we have had advances with how it is that we relate to one another, not only just within the generations, but within different areas of our lives, right? The parent child dynamic has shifted over the last generation, right? How it is that we start to leverage language to speak about the things that are impacting both us professionally and personally. All of that is changing and it's not easy. It feels like growing pains. So, listen, people are actually working. They're just not willing to tolerate nonsense anymore. What leaders call laziness is often actually just boundaries. And so because we have language around that today. And burnout is not a badge of honor. It used to be, but it's not any longer. It's actually a system failure, and human capital is the sacrificial lamb. That's the nonsense that people are no longer willing to tolerate anymore. Now, this quote, old school approach to work ethic used to look like long hours. You were there before the boss got there, you were there after the boss left, right? That's how you demonstrated your commitment, your loyalty. That's how you identified yourself as someone who was seeking approval, seeking advancement and promotion, right? This was loyalty without the leverage. This was leveraging your time to be able to buy into the commitment using your efforts in order to demonstrate that loyalty. This was pay your dues and don't complain, right? Don't complain about the work that you've been given. Don't complain about the how you have to execute it because I'm going to tell you. Don't worry if you have to run over what we call boundaries today. You will work longer, you will work harder, you will run up the stairs. Tolerate kind of interpersonal communication that today is absolutely taboo. That's a different environment. That's what we think that this old school work ethic meant. And that's part of the grieving process, is because now that we know better, we know that no one likes to be yelled at. No one ever has. It was just tolerated before. No one likes to be micromanaged. It has been tolerated because that was the expectation of being able to pass on how work is completed, how work is done. No one's having that today, right? It's a big pause. Absolutely not. It's a boundary that's been defined simply because it's been one that's identified as not being advantageous. Now, modern work ethic, right? Or today, current work ethic looks like valuing the output over the optics, right? This is not about demonstrating in front of your boss that I can do this, making others look bad, or speaking up during meetings to say that thing, to prove that I know how to do this, right? And some of that boastful activities that we've seen, of course, it still happens, but that's not where the workplace is headed. That's not where the value is being placed, right? This is not about what I look like doing this thing. It's about what my results are. It's that flexibility with the accountability. So no longer managing the how and sometimes even the when, but more so managing the accountability for what the result will be. Right? So it's leaning into and the professional of who they are. It's not about making sure that they're getting it done between 9 and 5. There can be some micromanagement energy around that. And this, of course, is dependent on your industry, on the work that you're actually doing. But where you have the opportunity to create that flexibility, it doesn't mean that the accountability is completely lost. It just means that you lean into holding that person accountable for delivering. And then next is it's the purpose plus the paycheck. It's not one or the other, right? It's understanding that people need to be bought into the purpose, the meaning. What exactly are we accomplishing? Now, this doesn't mean that everyone is looking to drive meaning out of the work that they do, but that it does exist, right? When we do provide that understanding, that alignment, the connection between the work that they do at their desk and how that stacks up to the strategy for the organization, you get greater buy in. Whether or not that's what they were requiring from you, you get a greater buy in from your staff. Now, and it's also too, and it's meeting the value of the work that they're doing with that paycheck, with that compensation. This is not saying that one is higher than the other, that in fact that they're married, that they have to be both important. Every generation values their effort, but they measure it very differently. Leaders might say that they don't care, but employees will actually feel that this isn't worth the cost. This is not worth me putting in the extra time because one, they're not paying me for that value. The role that they hired me for was to do exactly what I'm doing. If in fact it was intended that they would hit another level, which is what they're trying to push them to do, then the question is, why didn't you align the paycheck, the compensation with the value that you know that this role would provide? Right? It's the misalignment between what is intended to be the result and the outcome of the work that this person is going to do versus the compensation that you're going to meet them with from the very beginning. The disconnect is that leaders are rewarding that visibility, right? If I don't see you working, you must not be working. If I don't see those emails coming in at certain times a day, if I don't see the check ins and the updates and you asking me questions all the time, I'm not feeling validated that you are executing the role to the level that I am holding you to an expectation that perhaps maybe I haven't communicated. And employees are are optimizing that sustainability because they're also too with the tools that we have today, they're leaning into what can help me to be most effective and efficient in completing this task. Now, this doesn't mean that they're leaning into AI all the time. This doesn't mean that they are lacking the competence or not, they do not have the ability to process and actually execute the role, or that they're spending 4 hours a week when you measure this to be a 40-hour a week job. It's more so, it's the smarter versus harder conversation. They're choosing to try to figure out how to solve this problem, AKA the task that they've been given, right? With the tools and resources that they have available to them to do it. So work ethic did not disappear. The exploitation just stopped being aspirational. Now is part of my favorite time to jump into this podcast where we start to decode the generation. And today's phrase, guess word, of course, is work ethic. Now, I want to dive into and peel this open a little bit at the generational level to understand how, in fact, everyone, in fact, is saying the same thing, right? They're valuing the same thing of the contribution and ultimately the results, but everyone is using different language and they are placing the emphasis a little differently. But trust me, we all mean the same thing. We're trying to get to the same conclusion. So let's break this down. So, boomers, when they are pursuing work ethic, this is tied to an inherited understanding in the workplace, right? Which endurance, how long can you run that race, right? How long can you run that marathon in order to execute and to demonstrate that you are pressure tested, right? That is how they start to measure the loyalty and the commitment. It's based on the time, how long and how persistent, how consistent are you at doing this thing? That has been the placement of the values. Now, with Gen X, the work ethic is more around independence and the results. So, them being able to execute in a way that is autonomous, that where they can be left to lead instead of being micromanaged, instead of being overseen. So it's this ability to be able to disconnect, go out and produce the results, right? That's where they place the value of what work ethic means. This is not necessarily about how long they're working in order to execute. Now, with millennials, this is where this starts to shift a little bit, right? Is where millennials are measuring their work ethic based on the impact that they're having, the growth opportunity that comes out of the contributions that they're having within their teams, within the organization. So they care about what does the work that they're doing, what does it mean to the overall good of the organization, right? Even if it's just at the team level, they want to know that they're not doing something that is ultimately throwaway work, right? And that on the other side of this effort, of a couple efforts, of there is some growth that is to be gained in this opportunity. It doesn't necessarily have to mean a promotion. It can just mean an acknowledgement that they are on the growth path. They need to know that this is part of a larger journey. Now, Gen Z, the work ethic means sustainability and boundaries, right? So I think it goes without saying, even millennials are seeking boundaries, and Gen X is catching on to this as well. But this is about creating some level of sustainability within their workplace. So they lean into working for organizations who are aligned with their values, right? So if they believe strongly in environmental law or environmental issues, they may work for organizations who are supporting that or who have a philanthropic activities in that way. So they're looking to align their values with organizations who are supporting them as well. They're also too looking for leaders who and a culture that will support the reinforcement of boundaries. So if there are issues, it doesn't matter the time or the place that they're working. If part of their values is that they will have leaders who will help them to grow, leaders who will recognize their boundaries, that perhaps maybe they have certain work hours, right? Especially those that are expected of them, that they are okay with accepting, and also too that they reinforce their own boundaries. So this isn't just the Gen Z worker, if you will, trying to hold up a line, a barrier to say, listen, you cannot cross this. But this is also to support it on a team where their leaders are also to in reinforcing their own boundaries, right? When leaders reward the effort that they can see instead of the value that's delivered, that's when they start to lose their best people, is because then there's a disconnect. right? We're measuring work ethic using different instruments. We're measuring based on time, based on level of suffering, based on length of suffering, or duration of suffering, instead of leaning into measuring based on the result, based on the outcomes and the accountability that people can be held to. If you want that commitment, then you have to stop measuring the sacrifice and just start measuring the outcomes. What leaders need to let go of really has to do with this concept around a couple different things. One, around monitoring, checking in, overseeing activities. People need to be trained. People need to be able to also experience and try to test things out, to experiment, right? If we will. But we don't often give them that opportunity. Sometimes we give them minimal training, a little bit of guidance, and then we watch them take off and we continue to tell them exactly how to take every single step. Professionals don't like to be treated that way, regardless of how long they've been in their profession. If they're new to it or if they've been if very seasoned. No one likes to be told every single step of what to do. Not once we get to adulthood, right? And actually, you can argue once we become teenagers, we become rebellious as all get out, right? So why would we apply that same mentality when we start to step into the work environment, right? This also too, they need to let go of this idea of the time that used to be, right? Of how things used to work, of how teams used to be run, of how, when how you would measure success was based on how much time you were spending, right? As well as this idea that your friends become or your colleagues become your friends. That's not a requirement. Certainly not for some of the generations entering into the workplace now, where it might have been a higher value for maybe, boomers or for Gen X going into the workplace, but it's certainly not a requirement for Gen Z or maybe even those cusp millennials. They're not thinking about it that way, right? This is a means to an end, and sometimes that can feel like a slap in the face for those of us who have been in the workplace for a certain amount of time, and we have our work friends. We've grown with these, long bonds. I've had friendships that have been over for over 20 years, from some of my first roles that I've had. But that's not the requirement, and it's not the benefit that you think that your teams are looking for, especially some of those who are newer in their career. The point is that higher performers don't quit on the work. They quit the environments that don't respect how they work. And that doesn't look the same for everyone. All right. Now, you've been listening to the Generational Edge with Kristina Green podcast, and I am your generational translator. If today's episode kind of messed with your definition of work ethic, well, then good. That was actually intentional. So instead of sulking on it or sending me a bunch of comments, which I'll gladly receive, share this episode with a colleague who perhaps maybe keeps saying, "Oh, kids these days," right? Or boomer, "Oh, okay, boomer," right? We've got to find a way to connect. And sometimes it starts by just aligning on language. All right. This felt uncomfortably accurate, then I want you to do something about it. Don't just sit on it. And until next time, take care.